Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this blueVEN webinar, Seamless Metric Management with blueREPORTER. So my name is Jen, I'm on the marketing team here at blueVEN, and we're also joined by Dan Taylor, who is Customer Success Manager at blueVEN. I'll be passing you over to him shortly, and he'll be taking you through the webinar. Okay, so firstly, if you haven't been onto one of our webinars before, it's good to note that you can ask a question throughout the presentation, so please fire these over to us, and we'll try and get to as many as we can at the end. Any that we don't cover, we will contact you shortly directly by email after the webinar is finished. Okay, so what are we going to be learning today? We are going to learn how to pull data from Blue Analyzer into an Excel report, how to pull existing queries from your ADS into an Excel spreadsheet, use Excel's native formula to build queries that synchronize in real time with Blue Analyzer, drive and populate your dashboards at a click of a button. Right, so that's all from me. I'm now going to pass you over to Dan. Please bear with me a couple of moments while I send the screen access over to him.
Hi there everyone, hope you can hear me okay. Thank you for the introduction, Jen. So as we said, today we'll be going over blueREPORTER. As a quick overview, blueREPORTER is a COM add-in for Microsoft Excel, which stands for Component Object Model. Now what this basically means is it will allow you to automate and streamline running any dashboards and reports you may have built. This add-in will work as a bridge between Excel and your Blue Analyzer interface. This will allow you to empower and populate your dashboards using any queries, any analytics which you might have built in ADS already. Now what this also means is you can also run any counts, output any data into Excel. You can also push it further and use Excel's native formula to build new queries. Now once done, that can feed back into your Blue Analyzer interface, which you can then use to empower your dashboards further. Now all of this can be done without even logging into Blue Analyzer at all, so it can all be done from your Excel interface. So as a quick overview, today we'll be running through our hypothetical outdoor and leisure company, Acme. Now in this example, they've requested we build a dashboard just to show the transactions across each month for the brand. Now they want this to be dynamic, so we can change months at random and it will pull those reports automatically and without any further intervention. So as we can see in the dashboard in front of us, we've got our main key elements, so we can see how many items have been purchased, the monthly value of those, indexing this across, and the graphs to show the transactions per month. Now as we can see, as we select these graphs, these will pull data from these tables here. Each of these in itself is an element that pulls this data straight through from our Blue Analyzer interface. Now as we can see at the moment, we're looking at February. As we can see already, we've had 8,000 orders for this month. Now if you wanted to refresh this to see March, we'll select March from the drop-down, click refresh. Now this will bring up our element refresh progress bar. Now this shows us in real time our calculations as they're working through. So within a few seconds we can see already for March, we've had 9,900 transactions for the month. It's for some £3.9 million, and we can see the graphs have all refreshed through again, now including March's data. And now we're in May, we should have all of April's data as well. So now we can drop down for April for this month, refresh again. And there we are, 9,500, 3.7 million. So slightly less, but still a good month overall. Now each of these is powered by using what we would call an element. Now these can allow us to pull different sets of data through different methods into Excel. So we can talk you through a few of these options and how they work. So we'll start this on a new sheet. So to access your elements and your add-ins, opening up Excel, you can see we'll have a tab here for add-ins. Now if we click on this, we'll have our options here to configure our blueREPORTER. So to create a new element, you can click on this icon here to create an element. Now this will open up the wizard where you will do most of your configuration and where you'll set most of your settings for your blueREPORTER. Now if you don't want to see it every time, you can untick. I like to keep it there just so I know I have set up a new element. So the first thing we want to do is connect to our database. Now, as you can see on our training system, we've got a few here, so we'll just select the right one for the job. Now, when you load this in your view, you'll only see your data to hand. So we'll click Next. So this is the main view where we can select the type of element we'll now build. So I'll give you a quick talk through of what each of these do, but we can run through in more details as we go along. So the first option is cross-tabulation. Now what this means is you'll be able to pull a distinct set of data and apply further analytics to it. In terms of how that would look in Analyzer, this will be your bandings and your crosstabs. So if you've got a distinct set of data, for example, gender, male, female, undisclosed, those would show 3 distinct values, and you can see all of the records for those. The next is record selection. Now this will allow you to pull data as you'll see it in ADS into Excel. So if you want to pull any lumps of data, so for example any individual records with names, address data, email data, you can use this to load into Excel. Query definition, you will use this if you wanted to select a query you saved in Analyzer and view this in Excel. Now this can have benefits if you wanted to just double check any criteria you've used, or if you want to pull an element in and start editing that in Excel to change the data across. The next option then is record count. Now this is quite a straightforward view. All this will do is if you've got a query or a set of parameters you want to feed in, you can send that query back into ADS and it will give you a number for those. So as we saw with our test dashboard, the number of transactions for the month, that was just used using a record count, criteria ran in the background, and we got our number. The next element is field statistics. Now this is used to run any calculations on an integer-based field, so any numbers. So for example, if you have a table with your transactions for the month, you might want to summarize and calculate the total value for all of those. You might want to look at the average spend or any statistical analysis you want to run on any integer-based data. That will be used with your statistics. The last element we can use then is called Venn analysis. Now this uses our very well-known and loved Venn diagrams. You can throw in several sets of data and this will pull a Venn diagram into Excel in real time. Now, for our first example then, with our hypothetical dashboard, if you had, say, a supplier who wanted to see their top 10 spenders for the year, you might want to pull this data out into Excel and view those records to hand. So to do that, we'll start by using a record selection. Now, you'll see at the bottom here, you've got the element reference cell. By default, this will be the cell that you've clicked when you selected to create a new element. If we want to change this, we can click on this icon here. We'll be presented with cell reference, so we can tell it where to build this cell. But for now, we'll keep this in B2, where we start anyway. The next thing you want to do is give this an element name. So as we're looking at our top 10 spenders, we will name it exactly that. So once you're happy with your element type, where you're putting the cell and the name of it, and click Next. Now the options you'll see here in the next view will depend on the type of element you've selected. So in this example, for a record selection, we're given a straightforward set of what records do we want to pick. So we'll just talk you through these options here. The first option is full data set. Now what this will do is pull all of your data for your selected table into Excel. Now this can be useful if you're looking at any bandings or you want to look at any overviews of data. That's great. For a record selection, I wouldn't recommend using this as much because what we'll look at doing is pulling then every single record from our individual table. Now, while in Excel, it'll be able to handle loading 800,000 individuals in. It might take a little bit of time, but that's down to that one. So for now, we're going to look at selecting a stored query definition. Now what this will do is, as we can see, we've selected our individual table. This then feeds into ADS to give us a list of all of the queries we have saved in our system. So we can select through these and pick any query we've already saved. If you wanted to, you can also enter a new query definition where you can write the syntax yourself. So for example, if we wanted to see all of our items purchased in 2016, just retype this in. And that would then process through as our query. as for now, we're just looking at individuals, so what we'll do is select our individual table back. The last option then, which we'll go through shortly, we'll be looking at using Excel's cells to give you a new query. Now, this can be very powerful if you're using a cell or dynamic content to build the syntax in real time, which can then feed back into the ADS. We'll have some examples of this we'll show you later on in this demonstration. So for now, we'll start off and we're going to select our top 10 spenders for 2017. Now, that's a query we've built and saved into the ADS already. So you can select that and click Next. So because we've selected a record selection, it's now asking us what data we would like to output. Now, we have two options here. We can either select the individual fields and pick one by one the data we want to see, or we can use the first option and pick a field template saved in our ADS already. Now, what we'll do is pick our individual table, that's the data we want to see, and click Next. This will then give us the list of field templates available for this data set. So if we drop this down, we can see these two. But for now, we'll just pick our individual data, which we can see. We've got first name, last name, gender, age, and then some order details. So if we go ahead with this, it gives us an overview of what we're telling the element to build and what we're asking to see. So we've got the name and type, our database, the table it's working at, calculations, and then the data we wanted to output. So if we click Next on this to confirm, we can see that's processed through. So what this will look at is pulling all the requested data from ADS and pasting this in using the fields we have, which we can see here. Now, you'll notice when you build an element, the cell it references now has a comment in the cell. Now, this is quite useful if you want to scan through and see what your element's doing. You can hover over and it gives you that information to hand. If not, it will just hide neatly there if you need to reference it. Now, the next thing we might want to look at is seeing the total spend for these 10 individuals. Now, there's a few different ways you can do that. The first way we can do is if you select all this data in Excel natively, you can see our total value, £22,069. However, rather than having to do this each time, we might want to be a bit smarter and tell the tool to calculate that for us. To do that, we will now use a field statistic element. So if we go back through to our add-ins and create a new element, as we can see, we've selected this cell, so this is where we're telling it to put the element in. Here we have our wizard back again, select our database. Now this time, we'll call this one total spend. And we'll select from our drop-down field statistics to say we want to build some analysis on some integer data in our database. So because we've selected a different element, we now have new options available. So what it's asking us to do now is to select our integer field we want to run our analysis on. Now, as we can see, this won't show us every field in the database. It will only show us numeric fields we have available. So you wouldn't be able to do any calculations on a first name because it's a name. So what we'll do is we'll select down and we'll find the total spend for 2017. The next window then will ask us what statistics we want to run and calculate. So here we have a number of options available. So if we wanted to see the total, which we do, we can click Sum. If we wanted to see any other sort of aggregate data, so the largest value or the smallest value, you can tick these as well. If you want to see the averages, then you can see these. You can tick any combination of these and it will calculate those and display them separately. For now, we're just looking at the totals, so we'll click Sum and continue. Now, as we saw with the last element, it's asking us what data set we want to build this on. So what we can do is find our query that we built before on our individual table and continue. Now, there's no limit to how many elements can reference one query. So if you have one query saved and you want all of your elements to run off that, that's absolutely fine to do. So there's no restrictions on using multiple elements to pull the same data. The next window we can see here is sampling. So if, for example, we were looking at our full data set of all 800,000 individuals in the system, we might want to limit that. We might not want it to calculate on everything, so we just want a quick sample while we're going through. We know from our query we're only looking at 10 individuals, so we won't need to change any samples here. But if you wanted to, you can tick the sample. It gives you the ranges available to look at. And also if you want to set a data range instead, so a minimum and maximum, you can select those as well. But for this case, we'll leave that empty. So now we've picked our options. As we can see, we have just a summary of what this wizard will be doing. So here's our element names and types, database, and what we've asked us to do. So if we click next again, that will calculate, and here's our sum. Now if we wanted to quantify that, we can see that's just a number pulling from this element, just there. So if we wanted to test that, we can summarize all of these to get the same number. Now, if you wanted to see the average spend for each of these individuals as well, you could go back in and edit this element. So if we go to our add-ins, we'll see a few new options available now, which we'll quickly run through. So because we've selected our element, these are now available to us. So we can see new element now has been hidden because we can't create one from this. So the new options available are to edit our existing one, rename the element if we wanted to tidy it up a bit. We can also copy either this one element or the sheets elements. Now what this will do is copy both this and our selection. Once copied, you'll then have an option to paste that. You can also delete your element using the red cross. And the next four we'll come on to shortly, but these will be if we wanted to refresh and compare or make any changes to our elements there. So what we'll do for now is edit this one, so we can see the average spend as well. So as we've already set this up, we don't need to make the changes here. We can just go through and go back to our window. So what we want to see as well is the average spend for each of these individuals. So what we can do is just tick this and confirm back through. We don't need to make any further changes at this point. And here we can see now the average spend for those. So what this average will do is look at the total value from our case group and then split it, calculating the mean by the number of individuals there. Now with this sum, quite a straightforward one. So we've got 10 individuals, so here's their total spend and split it 10 ways, which you can roughly see translates across these individuals here, where some spend 2,000, some spend 2.5, so we do have our aggregate here. The next thing we might want to look at then is building a basic crosstab. Now this will be if we're comparing two distinct sets of data where there's a finite number of values available. Now these won't work if you're looking at things such as email addresses or household addresses because you'll be in the thousands. However, these are very powerful, very useful if you're looking at restricted sets of data, for example, a product name, item description, individual marital status, any combination of finite results. So what we'll do is create a new element, take our database, and this time what we will look at is looking at the number of items which have been purchased for 2017 so far. So we'll call this 2017 items. And we've picked cross tabulation as our element type, and we'll continue here. So what we have here now is two different options. So we have the analysis table, which will be where all of our calculations are based. We then have the display table, which will change the output which is displayed. Generally, these two will be the same thing. If you're looking at building any analysis for your items and then outputting and displaying your items, they'll be the same. So from this, we can pick item, and that will update automatically. So now we're at the item table. We've now been given a list of all of our discrete fields in our database for this table. So what we'll do in this case is pick our item descriptions. So we've highlighted the distinct banding here and click on the arrow here to combine this in. Now you can include any combination of these fields available just by selecting and using the right arrow. If you want to remove those or reorder, you can use the up and down to drag these around. But as they're not necessary for this, we can just select them and remove them here. Now we have our summary measure. Now this is asking us what data we want to see from this. Now in this example, we just want to, at the moment, count the items which have been purchased, so we'll leave this as a count. In this example, now it's asking us what data we want to analyze. Now, as we said before, what we want to look for at this one is items which have been purchased in 2017. So what we can do, select a new query definition for our items, and type this in. Now it's asking us what display we want to do. As we've already picked the data we're going to be analysing, we can keep this at full. Now here we'll have a few format options. So if we want to see unpopulated rows or columns, uncategorised values, now in your ADS this will be your no matches. Now as we know our data doesn't have those for these transactions, we can untick those. Now we might not want to see unpopulated sets of data, so we'll just keep it to these. So if we go ahead, confirm these, this will then run and build. So we can see from this, for 2017, these are the items which have been purchased so far. Now if you wanted to quantify this or see some analysis to see which is the most purchased, we can just add a format to this. So from this we can see that coats have been very popular so far this year, whereas GPSs so far haven't. Now this might be because GPSs are more expensive, coats are slightly cheaper, so let's drill into this a little more. So what we can do is create a new crosstab, select our data. Now we'll call this one item values. So what we'll do this time is select our item descriptions again. Now we won't have a column dimension on this because we're just looking at the items. Now if you wanted to split your items by the month they were purchased in, you could add this in and this will give you a crosstab, but for now we'll just keep it as we are. Now where we had the counts before, what we can now do is add more data in. Now this is now including any field analysis into the crosstab. So if we select our item price, we now have a function available. So if we add in the sum, this will summarize the item values for each of these transactions. However, we might also want to see the average transaction value of those as well. So now we have our three sets of measures. So just to make sure we're working with the same data set, we'll enter our query again. And let's hide our uncategorized. See the summary there, and process through. Now here we can see the same values again for the counts of items purchased so far this year. So if we stick some formats onto this just to highlight where our key values are, we can start to see some patterns emerge. So what we can see from this then is, as before, coats seem to be our most popular sets available. However, the best sources of income appears to be for the men and women's. Now we can see from these, coats for boys, dogs and girls aren't necessarily as high a value, so they're not bringing in as much money. Now we can see as well the average prices across our items. So from this we can see the more expensive ones are our GPS models and our coats. However, we can see a distinct difference in one selling better than the other. Now, bits of analysis like this can be very useful for fueling just some basic business decisions based on how items are performing for this year. Now, you might want to change this and look at instead the months available rather than the years, but for now, we can just see as a highlight view for 2017 so far how things are performing. The next thing we'll look at then is if we wanted to see data based on a specific item. Now, what we might want to do for that is build a function which will look at just this item. So what we can do is use Excel's native formula to start to build our own syntax now. So what we can do is add in two sets of data. One will be a double quote, and the next will be our item. So here we can say order item, apologies. Now what we can do with these two sets of data is start to build our formula. So if we use an equals, we can select this cell and then combine it. This cell. And then if we select an item from this category, we can build these in. So what we can do with this now is we've started to use Excel's formula to build our own queries. Add a space in there. Now using this, we could now change this so we can select data available. However, we might want to make this a bit more dynamic so we don't have to keep changing this each time. Now to do this, we could look at using some validation. So if we just move these to the side for now, and we can select our data available. So what we're doing now is just quickly building a quick drop-down. Now for our source, what we will use is the actual data that's been extracted from our banding. I'll give it a bit of space as well, so if we do get any further bits of data in, those won't be impacted. So we'll just confirm this. And we now have our drop-down where we can select our data. So instead of having our formula now to select these each time, we can instead just highlight that so we don't lose it. We can instead use our drop-down to fuel our calculations. So at the moment, nothing is selected. If we select maps, we can see our formula is now being updated. So what we can do with this is use this to include it in any further calculations we might want to use. So if we do a quick example and build a record count now, now the record count is the next element we'll look at. Now what this will do is, just as we've seen with previous versions, look at a calculation and just return the number. So what we'll do in this case, because it's asking us how we want to select this, we'll pick our table and we'll now pick the option to specify a cell which contains our definition. So pick item, then we'll select from the drop-downs and we'll pick our cell now which has our formula in. So now we can see from this syntax already how many items have been purchased across all time for that item. Now if we wanted to change that to a different item, the formula will update. So if we refresh this cell now, we can see the items update and change. Now rather than having to manually click to refresh these each time, we might actually want to be smarter with this and build a button that will do the refresh for us. So to do that, what we can do is if we select our element, go to add-ins, and here we can now start looking at our refresh options. So the first option we've seen as we've clicked so far is to just refresh the element we've selected. The next option along will refresh all elements in our worksheet. Now in this example, this will refresh the elements we've built so far today. The third option is to refresh all elements. Now this will refresh everything across all of our reports so far. So everything we've built on this sheet as well as our main report. The final option we'll want to look at is to create a refresh button. So what we can do is select this, which now gives us our options to pick how we want to refresh this. So we do have a few options available. The first one is to refresh a specific element. Now this then gives us a list of all of our items across the whole worksheet. The next option is to pick a specific sheet. As we can see below, we've got sheet 2 we're working on at the moment, our report, formula, and our graph data. Or we can do it for the whole workbook, which will refresh everything. So for this example, we're just going to look at refreshing our items. Now we can see this will come up here. A quick thing to note is if you're working with any macros, if you want to move this, difficult to do so far. So what you'll need to do is go to Developer and go to Design Mode, which will now allow you to move that across. Now if we wanted to refresh this, we can click. I think I've selected the wrong one there. Yep. So we need to refresh purchase count. So what we can do then is go back to Develop Mode, get rid of that, and assign that to the correct element. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. So what we can do now, if we updated our syntax, so we're now looking at first aid boxes, click refresh, this now updates. Now this can be good for data validation as well. So say for example, if instead of dogs, the data updated to cats. Now when this will refresh, this will update with the new values available. So next time you go to look at this, you'll see the new data set is there ready to use. However, as we know, we don't have any boots for cats in our system, so it's no good. So if we were to refresh this, the data refreshes there, and we have our real value again. So this gives us an overall summary of the different elements we can use for blueREPORTER. So just to translate that back into how we've done this with our elements here, we can see our drop-downs here, but you'll notice there's no formula around this sheet. So we've actually got a secondary sheet which has our formula here. So as we can see, we have a cell here that gives us our drop-down options. These then give us our month numbers, and we've also built in to look at the last day for each month. Now these in turn will then refresh the dates we're looking at. So we can see the start of the month and the last day for this month. Now these then refresh with the order date. So we can see the order date equals that and less than that, which feeds into the transactions we made for the month. So we can see that's in April at the moment. So if we quickly change that to March, if we wanted to backdate, the formula there has now changed back to March. So when we refresh, that data feeds through straight away for us. This then populates through for the second set of data we do, which looks at the transactions for the whole year. So we can see between the start of April 2016, the end of March 2017. This feeds into our graph data, again on a separate sheet. Now in this we've got a crosstab, which is using the cell to populate, and we have a crosstab of the dates they were purchased, split by the item category, which then feeds into this report here. So as we can see, we've used the different elements in concatenation together to feed in and give us different sets of data available and really drill into the data. Now anyone can then pick this up, look at the different data sets available and really see how the data looks across all time. So you don't need any technical level to run the report. So once they're set up, you can hand these across and we can then see the data you want to see. Great. So we're now going to hand you back over to Jen. She's been compiling questions as we've been going through, so we can start to do a quick Q&A and we'll see what we've got.
Great, thanks Dan. Yeah, we've had some questions through, so if you're ready, we'll go straight into them. Okay, so the first question is, if you've already built a report and you want to point it to a different ADS, is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. What you might find is if you're building a report on a test system and you want to push that over to live, within the settings for your blueREPORTER, you can repoint it to any different database. Now, it doesn't have to be on the same server. You can point it to a different location or locally, and you can point them all just to different macros again. So yeah, not a problem.
Okay, fantastic. Hope that answers your question. Okay, and the next question. I've tried refreshing a report early in the morning, and I keep getting permission errors. Why is this?
Now, normally that would be if, quite a common question actually, if you log in early in the morning, trying to get ahead of the day, if your ADS is still refreshing, you'll find naturally as a user you'll be locked out while it is just refreshing the final fields. Now, this is just a security measure just to make sure you don't interrupt the build or any of those processes. It's exactly the same with blueREPORTER. So if you're trying to run a report and it's trying to access those fields, you will get the same permission error message just to say that while the system's still rebuilding, you can't quite access those just yet.
Okay, great, fantastic. Brilliant. Well, that concludes the question section of the webinar. We hope you found the presentation beneficial. If you think of any more questions within the next, well, whenever, please feel free to contact us on the details you can see on the screen. So the training email address is customersuccess@blueven.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Fantastic. Hope you have a lovely day, and thank you for joining us.
Okay, thanks all.